Hello, hey, and welcome back. I'm putting together this short video to go over some of the terms so that you don't get too intimidated by the reading. The reading is a little heavy in terms of some of the terminology, so that is intentional because we're going to be sliding a little bit closer to academic stuff. So this is probably a little closer to academic type writing than maybe I've presented to you in the past. But I do think that it's important to get a little bit more background, not just Blood Meridian, but just because it is very heavily influenced by literature and other aspects, other theories. I don't necessarily need you to do a deep dive on it, which is why I'm giving you this article just sort of as a fait accompli, which means just it's presented as is, so to speak. Some of the terms in here, just so that you don't get too messed up with them, even though it does describe some of these in a lot more detail. Gnosticism is one term that is used in there, and it does define it. Essentially, it's just an early form of Christianity that just had sort of a way of looking at good and evil in very particular ways, and a way of looking at God, or the nature of God, in a very particular way. So that's probably what you want to pay attention to, is just sort of how it differentiates from sort of current ideas of, this an all-good, all-omnipotent God that Christianity espouses. The nature of good and evil is also something that does a little bit of a deep dive in here. You can see probably the way that it describes the nature of good and evil as sort of a little bit more ancient. I would say a continuum, but I'll let you read that yourself to figure it out. The other reference that it makes pretty extensively is Paradise Lost in some parts of it, because it wants you to understand sort of the nature of how the judge is modeled on the figure of Satan. Some of this stuff I will go over also I also went over, I should say, in the video review. If you've been watching those for the actual chapters, I do touch upon that. But the other thing maybe to pay attention to is how Paradise Lost is suggested as a model for not only the judge, but some of the other aspects of the way good and evil and God is treated. You don't have to read Paradise Lost. I've done that quite a few times myself. But it's basically just a story of Satan's fall from heaven after he waged war against God. Not entirely biblical account, but there's some suggestion in the Bible of this whole story. But essentially, he was put in charge of hell, and it's just sort of a big, epic, long poem from the 16th century that deals with sort of the nature of Satan's motivations behind that, and also maybe God's motivations. But don't worry, don't be scared by it, because Milton was a good little Protestant. So I don't mean that in a belittling way. I just mean that he was following a certain manner of thinking in terms of Christian thought. So that's just something to pay attention to. It's not, it's not a Christian tract. It's just more of a poem, basically just on the fall of Satan as sort of a stand-in for evil. Darwin is the other one that it touches upon, the origin of the species. You don't have to be overly schooled in that, but I do want you to note that it does suggest that at the end. That's probably a little bit more muddled if you're not familiar with sort of how the theory of evolution works. It's a little bit more muddled at the end, and it tries to sort of tie everything together using the idea of natural selection and or the origin of the species as background. Okay, so those are just some things that you want to probably think about a little bit. But maybe not too much before you go into it, but just as you do a deep dive, these are some terms that I want you to at least pay attention to as they pop up. Okay, and I'm hoping this is helpful rather than confusing. And then afterwards, when you do the discussion question, just do the best you can. I understand that you're not, I'm not expecting you guys to do academic research on this, but just respond to it as a reader that has read it fairly carefully, and just sort of accept the terms that it uses as the article defines them, and you should be okay. All right, thanks a lot.